I'm on staff with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. Is that okay? I work as a policy organizer, working on systemic actions related to climate change. So we work with faith communities across the state to advocate for actions to address climate change and advance climate justice. I'm going to be presenting today on some of the policy changes we're following and some steps we can take to support those. If we can get the slides up, I think we can move to the first slide. Nope. Nope. This is just our mission statement. We believe, let you read it, but like I said, we work with faith communities, and we're building the interfaith climate movement in Minnesota. So we work, I'm based out of Minneapolis, and our offices are, but I work with some groups in southern Minnesota. We have a staffer up in Duluth. So we really are a statewide organization that work with faith communities and people of faith across the state. You can go to the next one. We talk about 3 areas, and I think one of my colleagues might have touched on this. But we talk about practical, so solar and energy efficiency. Like Ray said, he's talking with my colleague Buff. I think one of my colleagues is going to be coming and presenting a little more on this in a few weeks. I do a lot of work on systemic, so policy advocacy, to support climate justice and clean energy and oppose expansion of fossil fuels. Then there's spiritual relational, and that kind of centers our work with faith communities. Later today, we have an event that's it's called the Community Iftar, celebrating the breaking of the fast as part of Ramadan. So we'll have an event online. You can visit our website, mnipl.org events, if you want to take a look at that. But celebrating, spiritual practice that's, relevant for a large part of our community. So it's kind of how we relate to all 3 of those areas. This is just a picture from a few years ago of a rally. We were at the Capitol. All the earth is holy, with some folks holding a banner. Our executive director, second from the left, Julia, my boss. So, yeah. This is an example, same banner as before, example of some of the policy advocacy that we've done. Both of these, I think, are actually, when we were engaging Representative Dean Phillips. Picture up above is one of the meetings we had last year. Last year we organized meetings with, I think, 7 of our 8 congressional delegation, either themselves or their staffers, and had members of various faith communities come and talk about why they care about climate justice and why they think we should pass federal climate legislation. And so that was a picture from our meeting with Representative Phillips. The bottom, we did a few months later, we did a letter drop at his office encouraging him to keep pushing. And federal climate legislation did pass the House, hasn't passed the Senate yet. We'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, we've done similar meetings this year. I've been organizing meetings with state representatives. So I think we've had 4 so far and have a few more scheduled. So yeah, it's kind of an example of what some of our policy advocacy work looks like. If you have questions as I go, feel free to stop me. We can also pause at the end. Also just wanted to highlight a few of our upcoming events and yeah, share what some of those look like. I might have updated some of my slides, so if there's more details, it's okay. But we do have, like I said, Community Iftar coming up. We have a webinar coming up on Tuesday, April 5th for building a better climate future. We also have an event coming up later in April. You can visit mnipl.org/events where we will have a webinar with Senator Tina Smith to talk about federal climate policy. So I would encourage you to check out our website, find out more about those. I also have a sign up here. Over here, if you want to sign up, you can be added to our email list to get updated information on that. Did want to talk a little bit about, we've been tracking federal climate legislation for a number of months, where things stand with some of that. So in 2021, as I said, we met with federal representatives to support bold climate action. U.S. Senate is still considering what would be the boldest climate legislation ever. We really feel that this needs to pass in 2022. If it doesn't pass, it's going to be much harder to pass in the future. I think the political headwinds are looking after the midterm elections, it's going to be a lot harder to pass federal climate legislation. And so the House passed a package that would include $550 billion in climate-related provisions, includes funding for clean transportation, clean energy tax credits, energy efficiency, among other things. And Senator Tina Smith, she's really been the leading voice on this, advocating strongly that this needs to pass and needs to be as bold as possible. So we've really appreciated her leadership, but so far it hasn't passed. We've seen Republicans in the Senate being pretty steadfastly against it, and senators like Senator Manchin being kind of on the fence and going back and forth. Might have heard the Build Back Better package was what a lot of this was included in, and that's been on hold. So yeah, we're still encouraging our federal legislators to keep pushing for this legislation. Are there any questions about this specifically? Okay, we can keep going. Yeah, and later we'll talk about how we can support that. Did want to talk a little bit about state legislature basics and kind of where things stand with some state level stuff. As folks might know, we have a divided legislature right now, with Democrats or the DFL controlling the House, Republicans controlling the Senate. And this has been, as all issues, and especially climate and clean energy issues, have become more partisan in recent years, this is made it harder to advance kind of any legislation, but especially kind of some of the bolder pieces of climate and clean energy legislation. So that's really played a factor, in how things have moved at the state legislature. You can move to the next slide. Did want to also just highlight kind of an example of one bill that we spent a lot of time supporting in 2021. It's a requirement that all electricity generation be 100% clean by 2040, so carbon-free. This was voted on by the Minnesota House and passed, but then when it got to the Senate, it failed 31 to 36. And you can kind of see, if you know your name of your senator, you can see where they voted. But yeah, it was a pretty stark indication of where things stand. There was a lot of support for it, but not enough for it to get over the finish line. So we're obviously disappointed. There were some smaller things in 2021 that passed, including funding for solar on school buildings, some increases to the state's energy efficiency program, but kind of the bigger, more transformative things that we really need to get our state to meet our carbon reduction goals and be a truly sustainable state, it didn't happen. And we're seeing similar things happening in 2022. We're supporting kind of three main things that we're tracking, and when we've been meeting with legislators that we've been highlighting. So I'll highlight those. First is the Minnesota House Climate Action Plan, and that would invest $1 billion of the budget surplus in climate initiatives. And so when we talk about the necessity of really investing in our state's future, this is a leading part of that. So there's a Minnesota House Climate Action Caucus, and they put together a proposal that would really, invest in climate solutions like clean transportation, energy efficiency, putting solar on state-owned buildings. And so we've seen part of that being introduced in various bills, and I think there's a chance some of it might pass this session, but we are seeing a lot of partisanship. And not a lot of agreement. So I would be surprised if all of it passes, but I think there's a chance to pass some of it this session. Yeah. Yeah, no, go for it.
On the previous list, I can see that our senator supported it. So what is it important to keep contacting people that already support things, or is there something else that people should be doing if your person is already on board?
Yeah, I think definitely yes. I think keeping the drumbeat, contacting people even if they already, seem like they're on board. Especially this legislative session, there's a lot of competing priorities for that budget surplus. And so it's important to remind them what their constituents want them to prioritize. And I can't promise that, if we write 20 letters to our senator, that that's going to make the difference. But I think it's important to remind them what their constituents want them to prioritize. And, frankly, if we were to all write letters to someone who isn't on board, if you're not their constituent, chances are they're not going to listen to you. So, I think it's important that we reach out to the people who are going to listen and who are, there to represent you. Because I think that's the people we can have the most impact with.
Maybe a letter thanking them for supporting it is important to you.
Yeah, I think that can be important. And then also just highlighting some of the specific things that they want to highlight. I have, these sheets that kind of explain how to write a letter, and it highlights, gives an example of a sample letter of what are some of the specific things to ask for. So it highlights some of the, Minnesota House Climate Action budget and some of the other specific ones that I'm going to highlight. So, yeah, I think, thanking them for being supportive and then highlighting some of the specific asks can be a helpful way to frame that. Yeah.
What are some of the examples of the third one down there of finding racial justice to environmental concerns?
Yeah, let me just keep going down the bullet points, but I'll get to that. I have a specific example of a bill that we're supporting. So yeah, second on the list, folks are familiar with bonding. It's how the state borrows money for kind of long-term investments in infrastructure. So it could be bridges, roads, state-owned buildings, sometimes specific community projects, so like a sports center or something like that. And there are ways that we can use bonding to invest in climate solutions. So like making our buildings more energy efficient, putting solar on community-owned buildings. Like one that I've heard this session is, on the docket is, putting solar on this huge ice rink in Roseville. So they can, have clean energy powering, a pretty energy intensive facility. And, also just making our communities more resilient. So, like stormwater infrastructure needs to be a lot better if we're going to have more extreme rain events. So there are examples of how state bonding funds can really make our state, better prepare, reduce our carbon emissions, but also better prepared to deal with the impacts of climate change. And so as we deal with climate change, we really have to be looking long term, and bonding is one of the ways we can do that. One last bullet point. And the last, kind of to get to your question, we're also prioritizing racial justice and equity legislation. One bill we've supported is what's called the Cumulative Impacts. And this deals with the environmental permitting process. So when a project is being considered, it would require them to not just consider the impacts of that project, but all the other projects that are already in a community, and especially in communities that are, have a higher concentration of people of color or, low-income residents, and also tribal residents. And so it would require more hearings, more community input, in the environmental permitting process. So, we think about, communities, especially if you've heard about, the Northern Metals plant in North Minneapolis, that's a community where there has been a lot of high concentrations of high pollution industries in a very small area. And so there's been, not just one project, but a kind of a cumulative impact of pollution in that area. So if a new project was proposed, they'd be required to have more hearings, more engagement, and take into account the impact of those other industries that are already there polluting those communities when approving the project. So we see this as a step in the right direction. Had a couple hearings in the House, including a hearing last Friday. So we're hoping it will get considered as part of larger bills towards the end of session. So this is one we've specifically highlighted in pushing for inclusion. Any questions on these before we move to the next slide? Okay, we can keep. We're also keeping our eye towards the 2022 election. In 2020, we were able to help facilitate conversations with 3,000 potential voters about voting their values. We're going to keep in 2022 in kind of a nonpartisan way. We're not telling people, which candidates to vote for, but encouraging them to vote their values. So we're looking for faith communities to get involved, encouraging people to pay attention to how their legislators vote this legislative session. And just a reminder, we don't tell people how to vote, but help them uplift the importance of voting and make sure they know how to vote. Little look on our journey. This year, we've kind of mapped out how we're going to engage. February, we encouraged people to get out and caucus for climate. We're engaging with our federal legislators. We're having the meeting with Senator Smith coming up in April. We're also doing in-district meetings with state legislators. So if anyone's interested in doing that, feel free. My email is sam@mnipl.org. I have an interest form I can send you. I'd be happy to help in the next month or so, help you set up a meeting with your state senator. I've done that with a number of other colleagues and had really enjoyable meetings with state senators as we remind them about the importance of prioritizing climate. So if that's something that any of you would be interested in, happy to help you do that. And then we're going to be pushing to get out the vote in the summer and fall, leading up to November 8th election day, and then hopefully pushing for really bold climate action in Minnesota coming up in 2023. So that's a little of kind of how we see things mapping out. Yeah, any questions before we move on to some letter writing options? Yeah.
So just in general, advocacy and letter
Yeah.
writing and talking to, what's effective? I get a lot of, let's say rest of the world, and they say, well, just click here and you can send a letter, an email to, your senators and representatives. And are those kinds of things effective? I mean, what's the research say about that, the effectiveness of advocacy and the various methods?
Yeah, I think in my experience, it really depends on who the target is. So if you're doing, we call those action alerts, and we do those as well. If you're doing that, you're targeting US senators, and they're getting 100 emails, they might see, oh, okay, a lot of my constituents care about this issue, but it might not, might not have a huge impact. I would say, at the federal level, I generally feel that, phone calls work better. They have people in their office, so oftentimes you can get through to a staffer, not the senator themselves, but a staffer. So I feel oftentimes phone calls or letter writing is more effective. At the state level, though, I found that emails, can have an impact, especially in the past 2 years where a lot of their offices haven't been shut down. Phone calls haven't been super effective. Times just goes to voicemail. And, in my experience, when you email a state representative, there's decently often that they will actually write back personally. If they're getting, so they'll notice if they're getting 20 messages about an issue. And sometimes, at the state level, districts are fairly small. So even if it's, something that we send out, sometimes they only get one of those messages, and so they might think it's, more personalized. I generally try and make our messages that we send out, not super wordy and not super long and, to the point, but, make it so it seems like it might be a little more personalized or coming from a constituent. Try not to use the big language. And so, yeah, and we try, have it so people can edit it or have a few different sample subject lines so it can seem a little more personal. And yeah, we've had experiences, people write their elected officials and they write back. So yeah, I would say at the state level with your state senators and state representatives, those emails, especially if you tweak it a little bit just to personalize it, can be pretty effective. So yeah. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, and I have heard back from both the federal and the state people.
Yeah.
And I think some of them are more form letters, like from Codify.
Yeah.
But at least acknowledge they got them and stuff. But I usually do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say especially at the federal, it's often form letters. But yeah, we've had, state senators be like, oh, can you tell me more about this issue? I haven't heard about this. Or, some of them sometimes have kind of snide, snarky remarks, and love to see that. But some of them are, very genuine and want to know more.
If you do get one back and they say like, can you tell me more about this issue?
Yeah.
Could people then, if they didn't have it at their fingertips, could they reach out to you?
Yeah.
I mean, like me, if I got that and I was like, I want to give something concrete and substantial, but I don't have it, can I forward it to you or something? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
help me with this, so it sounds good.
Yeah, and that's useful information for us. We're oftentimes working on issues or oftentimes in coalition with other people, so it's helpful for us to know if there are legislators who have questions, or if there are legislators who are really strongly opposed to it or in support of it. That's oftentimes helpful information. So yes, if you get a response, it's always useful to forward it on, and we're happy to help you. Answer that. Any other questions before we highlight a little? Okay. I've put together, printed off some sheets. I have a state and federal one. I'll just kind of, there's similar formatting, so I'll show you. So you're welcome to spend a little bit of time writing a sample letter to your federal legislators or to your state, encouraging them to support climate legislation. So we have a brief overview here, some background on some of the current proposals. We talked a little bit about what's in that, but it might be a little more details. Some key points you can make in your letter. And then we have a sample letter here as well. So, you're welcome to copy that, you're welcome to edit it. And then on the back, I have some letters, some stamps, some paper over there. We also have contact information for your state senators. I'm guessing here your probably representative is either Han Omar or Dean Phillips. If you live near here, you can write to one or both of your senators. It's up to you how many letters you want to write. The state one, I have some people, there are a lot more state districts. Folks are familiar, you can take a picture with your phone and it'll take you to a place you can enter your address, find the contact information for your state representative. So folks are familiar with QR codes, so also happy to help you look that up. And I included our core legislative priorities, so that's a little more context on some of the things we talked about. But similar sample letter, overview, key points to make. Any questions about that? Yeah.
How do you get people excited about this? There's some people that say, oh, this is recorded.
Yeah.
Other people will be watching it, but, it seems, in my mind, the problem is so huge. Why do people not do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy. I think that's a good question, and I think people, I don't have clear answers for it. But I think to a certain extent, people are, seeing bigger impacts of it. Across, we're seeing, more extreme weather events in our community across the country. So I think people are acknowledging it, but getting people, when people have day-to-day concerns, caring about something that it's hard to feel like I can have much of an impact, even on state policy and federal policy when things are so polarized. Even in my position, it's tough for me to feel like, I can have an impact. I can help people write letters, but, when you have, a good portion of our elected officials who are, strongly opposed to doing almost anything, it's hard to feel like you can have a real impact. So yeah, I guess at times, I feel frustrated that more people don't care, but I also can empathize with that feeling. When, it is tough to feel like you can make an impact when our political system is very polarized and, the problems are so vast. So I would say, I think it's important to do what we can, and I think it's important to talk with people about these issues, but it's also important to, have, tangible things that we can do to make a difference, be it advocacy, be it, practical things. I don't know if that really answers your question, but yeah. Outreach in 2020, we did a variety of things. We did, text banking to people in Minnesota and across the nation with some of our partners at National Interfaith Power and Light. We also did relational organizing where we trained our members in how to have conversations with their with their, people in their network. We also, help provide people rides to the polls if they didn't have it. We encourage people to draw chalk messages around their congregations about the importance of voting. I would say, people, we weren't having very, extremely in-depth. It was more just encouraging people to get out and vote. And I mean, I think a lot of people were receptive. I don't know. Off the top of my head.
Everything from lack of understanding, lack of information, to like overwhelm, right?
Yeah.
Like we're just so big and there's so many other things going on that like for that is part of it too. When I know it's a problem.
Yeah.
So what can I do? So it was a hard one. I didn't know that if you had heard from people, I just don't have the mental capacity to wrap my mind around this right now.
Yeah, and I mean, in that context, we were, just basically asking people to vote on a pretty simple level, so it's less. Yeah. But we talk about a spectrum of allies, strongly against to strongly for us. A lot of people fall somewhere in the middle of kind of like passive allies or, kind of like, oh, yeah, we should do something, but I don't, have time or I don't know what we should do. So most people fall somewhere in there. But there are people who, are like, oh, climate change is a hoax. This is all a lie. Fossil fuels are great, So there are those people, and especially as the, culture wars have deepened, there is kind of in parts, there's that mentality that's deep-seated in folks. But we don't view our job as to convert those people. Our job is to motivate the people who are kind of on the fence and provide them ways to take action.
Have you seen any particular techniques or strategies that individual churches have used successfully to kind of motivate people?
I mean, I think providing people with action opportunities like this, providing, we've had success congregations getting, solar energy and providing that as, a story you can share with your community, helping provide, congregation members with opportunities, to improve the energy efficiency and other things in their own homes. We've had congregations who've, installed electric vehicle charging stations and things like that to help, make their places of worship more sustainable. I think there are things you can do in your facilities and also, providing opportunities for your congregation to engage, in activism and pushing for systemic change. So I don't think there's, one surefire method, but I think there are a variety of ways that people can engage. And we have a, climate justice congregation program where people can, set some goals and, have action steps in a variety of areas. So, I would encourage you as you, as your congregation continues to lean into that, staying engaged in those programs.